Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to 100 Degrees. I am your host, Patrick Ross, and as you can see, we are still decked out in Team Canada colors because we are still alive, baby. We are playing for gold on Sunday in 2 days' time, and man, that's just, there's no feeling in the world like it. Or at least I should say that our men's team is going to play for gold here on Sunday. Our women's team played for gold yesterday, and unfortunately, the result was not nearly what everybody had hoped for. I mean, obviously. It was the same type of story that by now I think that everybody is used to seeing in women's hockey at the Winter Olympics. Very close game between Canada and the United States, went to overtime again, like the last several have. But unfortunately, the end of the story is not quite as a lot of people had come to expect for quite a long time. I mean, at one point, Canada had won, I think, had won 4 straight gold medals in women's hockey at the Olympics, interrupted by a gold medal for the United States, and then one more for Canada, and then this year again, it goes back to the United States again. Many of those games going to overtime, as the one yesterday did. We just about managed to sneak out with that one, but the Americans managed to score to tie the game pretty late. And in all honesty, I mean, Desbienne, she stood on her head. She did everything that she had to do to get a different result for this game for Canada, but she just didn't get the run support out of the forwards, out of the skaters, out of the rest of the team. And there's quite a bit to be said about that. I mean, obviously, you do have to look at that group of skaters and say, well, one more goal in regulation would have won you the gold medal. All you need to do is come up with one more goal, and you just couldn't find it. And that's one thing, but I mean, to me, the other thing is I think to really understand this result, you actually have to look outside of that group of players. And you actually have to take a good look at Team Canada brass. You have to take a look at the people who selected this team. And once you do, you kind of understand that really, women's hockey has been close enough between these two countries for long enough that if the United States wins one, that's hardly a miracle on ice. And this result definitely was not a miracle, but I would actually go so far as to say that it was a gift. This was a gift from Team Canada's brass to the United States women's hockey program, and enjoy it, I suppose, because I don't think that by any means this was a result that ever had to come of this. And to make my point, all you really have to do is you have to look at these results out of the Canada-USA rivalry series that they have been playing now for, well, I think they've been playing this series now for 2 or 3 years, but in particular, I'm going to look at the results over the past year. And so I did write them down so that I make sure that I don't make any mistakes when I'm repeating this, but here are the results of the last 4 games between the United States and Canada prior to the 2026 Olympics in Milan Cortina. So 4-1 for Team USA. The next game, 6-1 for Team USA. The game after that, 10-4 for Team USA. So Canada did a little bit better on the offensive side of it, but much worse on the defensive side of it. And then they concluded that with a 4-1 victory for Team USA at Rogers Place in Edmonton. Somebody in the Hockey Canada brass knew that this team was just not good enough to beat this version of Team USA. They knew that, but they still insisted on going forward with this lineup to try to win the gold medal in Milan Cortina. My Brad Pitt Italian accent has not gotten any better. It's never going to get better. I have resigned myself to this. But, all right, so the point being, everybody and their dog had to have seen this result coming. And it doesn't appear to me that Team Canada did anything to try to, just get off of the tracks, at the very least. They just stood there and they stared this train down And now the result is in the books. We know how that turned out. This is something that I've said repeatedly, during these Olympics and in the lead up to these Olympics. And that is that when you're talking about international hockey, when you're talking about a best on best tournament, or even any tournament whatsoever, for the winners, there's never any story about who they selected. They won the tournament, so they picked the right players. They obviously picked the right players because they won. But for everybody else, the story always becomes about, which player wasn't there? Who did you pick? You obviously didn't take the right players, and that's why you didn't win. That's usually the presumption, and I think a lot of the time that's correct. And sometimes it isn't even necessarily about players that they didn't choose. Sometimes it's about players that just weren't available due to injury. So, for example, maybe the one that comes to mind for me, the absolute most, 1998 in Nagano, the first year that the NHL was going to allow its players to participate in the Olympic Games, and the first year that the IOC was going to allow NHL players to participate in the Olympic Games. Gary Suter basically knocks Paul Kariya's head off and knocks him out of the tournament. Otherwise, 10,000% Paul Kariya was going to be in that tournament. But he wasn't there. So Canada went to the Olympics, didn't win, lost that absolute heartbreaker in the semifinals to the Czechs, and then just basically kind of farted their way out of the rest of the tournament. And while there was kind of like a subplot about which players they chose to participate in that shootout against the Czechs in that semifinal game, the big one that people kind of look back on and they wonder about is, how would this have gone differently if Paul Kariya had just been able to be there and play? We don't seem to have the same excuse available to us as it pertains to this. We don't seem to have the same excuse available to us as it pertains to this women's hockey tournament this year. It seems like all of the players that the Team Canada brass wanted to be there were available to be there. And I think, in a certain extent, maybe that's what the problem was. Because as it turns out, here's an interesting statistic. The average age for Team Canada in this tournament was 30. The average age for Team USA was 25. So the Americans sent a much younger team, and that's probably a big reason why they looked so much faster. Just about every area of the ice, particularly in that 5-0 shutout in the preliminary round, which was very hard to watch, but I did watch the whole thing. The Americans, their players were there first at both ends of the ice, pretty much all areas of the game, all of the key puck battles. It just didn't seem like Canada was even in it. They were just outclassed, outrun, and then outgunned. And then once you consider that particular statistic, well, it becomes very hard to not feel like that was very much a part of their blueprint. Like that idea was part of their blueprint, and the idea that they were going to shift to a much younger team. Apparently, I believe that there were something like 8 players on this Team USA that had not been to the Olympics before. I believe that was the number that the commentators used during the game. I have attempted to double check that, but I haven't been able to come by those stats very easily. So with that in mind, you have to look at the Team Canada they sent this year. Largely the same Team Canada that they sent in Beijing. Largely the same Team Canada that they sent in South Korea. And very few of these players had been born after the 1998 Olympics. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can hammer this point, and I don't think that very many of them actually sound all that good in the context of this. Canada just kind of sent not just an older team, but they kind of sent the same old team that they've sent over and over again. And so there was a point that I had raised in the last podcast here that I did, where I talked about how Canada had kind of, had on the men's side, Team Canada has been bringing in the younger players and filtering them in. And I guess for this Olympics, they pretty much had to, because it's not like they had a largely intact Olympic squad from, what was it? From 2016. Oh, pardon me, I meant from 2014. But it wasn't like they had that team largely intact just to go back to, because there's been 2 whole Olympics since the last time that NHL players have been in the Olympics. So they did have to go to a much younger lineup. But even from the team that competed in the Four Nations face-off just last year, added a few new players to that who didn't compete in that particular tournament. So there's been an active effort on the men's side to bring in the younger talent, to kind of groom them, show them the way, make sure that they get their feet wet, and make sure that you're building the next Team Canada, right now. And I think that perhaps you could go so far as to say that on the women's side of it, Canada needed the next Team Canada right now. And we just finished playing a tournament with the last Team Canada, in which we really needed the next Team Canada, and we didn't get that. And that is very much reflected in the result that we got. And it's very much something that we saw coming. I'm not going to sit here and even entertain the idea that, they should have seen it coming, but they didn't. No, they saw it coming. We all saw this coming. And they did absolutely nothing to change that result. Now, I suppose I should, before I forget to, I should add a little asterisk to some of the talk about age, because obviously there are a few of the players here that were a little bit older that actually played quite well, all things considered. It's not like we can just sit here and necessarily blame all of the older players for it. I mean, Marie-Philip Poulin, she got injured in the first game, and if she hadn't, then she would have been a much different player throughout the remainder of that tournament. So, there is that. Now, on top of that, Natalie Spooner, she's a little bit older now, but she played very well in this tournament, so it's not like you can only blame it on the older players. But there were a few players in this tournament, older players, who seemed like they didn't really do all that much. And in all honesty, it's a little bit hard in the aftermath to look at Sarah Nurse and see any reason that she would have been in this tournament, with the exception of it just let a bunch of banks and such run ads with her sister in it. It doesn't please me to say that. I don't dislike Sarah Nurse, and I think that her cousin Darnell really gets crapped on way more than he deserves to with the Edmonton Oilers. But she went that whole tournament with no points. And it's not like all of those games were played against the Americans, right? We also played some of the lesser hockey countries. And for a lot of these players that previously we're kind of used to see them score, we're used to see them, assisting on goals. It just wasn't there this time around. So it wasn't just the competition with the younger Americans that was posing a problem for them. It seems like it was also competition with some of the other countries, the lesser countries. I do think that women's hockey has come along quite a bit, but, the one detail that kind of remains above everything else is that at this point, it is still largely a two-country competition. So when your team is doing so poorly in direct competition with the country that is your direct competitor in this sport at the Olympics, then obviously some changes had to have been made. They weren't made. And I think that somebody at Team Canada, somebody at Hockey Canada, is going to have to answer for why those changes were not made.